I've told you this a number of times. Like when there's chaos, like run towards it because that's where you can make the biggest impact. If things are shiny and great and sunshine and rainbows and ponies, like okay, that's great. If there's fires and it's chaos and screams of anguish, like that's where you need to run to because that's where you can make the biggest impact, right?
B2B sales isn't broken, it's blind. Buyers don't see your value, deals die in the budget queue, and the best solution doesn't always win. Guy Talk brings the voices reshaping how you sell, win, and grow. That's Guy Talk, hosted by me, Guy Mobley. All right, guys, welcome in to the very first inaugural Guy Talk podcast. I'm your host, Guy Mobley, and today we have with us Mr. Ryan Black. He's a C-suite executive, he's a go-to-market strategist, he's an operator and an investor, and now the founder of Beyond Banyan. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm honored to be on the very first Guy Talk.
I'm honored to have you here, considering our history together. We've known each other for roughly a year and a half at this point, and to think that I was an intern last summer working with you, and now I'm a full-time and the first employee at Beyond Banyan, your company. It's
Employee number
it's a
one.
crazy story. Yeah,
So can I ask you a question to start off?
absolutely.
So what is Guy Talk? Like what do you want to get out of Guy Talk?
Yeah. So Guide Talk is, one first and foremost a learning experience for me, right? I get to
Mhm.
go out in the world as someone that's wet behind the ears in their first job and just straight out of college and talk to people, learn about their experiences, their success, and just pick their brains about, how they got to where they are and what makes them magical, I'll say. What's their
I
superpower?
love it.
Or so that's what I'm trying to get out of it. It's a cool learning opportunity for me first, most importantly.
I tell you what, like what I love about this is so you graduated Clemson in May, right?
Right.
You joined Beyond Banyan, which is a merry group of highly tenured professionals who are super smart um, and genuinely enjoy each other's company and working together and solving big complex problems for clients. So why not share this with the world, right? So and it's
100%.
not just going to be the Beyond Banyan team. We've thrown you into the deep end with clients. So you're talking with clients every single day. So what do they care about, right? There's subject matter experts across the entire market. Like what do they actually care about? So I think that's super fun and I am honored to be your first guest.
And it's a great kind of segue. Just to hit on that real quick. I mean, I chose Beyond Banyan first and foremost because that mentorship and the experience level of everyone on the team is super special, and the fact that I get to come to work every day and tap in to that experience, and then you know to interact with clients who are been in the industry for 20 years, and they're like, you know what, I want to start my own thing. So we have that I have the opportunity to one talk to people that are trying to create a new business, or
Yeah.
we're talking to people that are running businesses that have been around for 20, 25 years, and they're like,
Well,
what do we do
or
differently?
sometimes multi-billion dollar plan sponsors,
Yeah,
right? That are large,
exactly.
complex, tens of thousands of employees.
Which creates an interesting question for me because you've had a tenured career, um, and now you're at this company where people on both ends of the spectrum are willing to take your advice and to listen to what you have to say, and that's a huge thing that speaks to your reputation and your credit. So I'm interested in hearing, and our listeners I'm sure as well are interested in hearing maybe how you got here. What were those points in your career that really shaped who you are today? And then I'll ask you my $1 million question kind of after a little more.
And so here's what's really interesting to me. So I started at Hewitt in 1997, right? Which is my gosh, almost 30 years ago. Doesn't seem like that. And that culture was one where it's really something we're trying to replicate here. And having you on board it's a wonderful kind of two-way street, right? So back then, I was the young kid just out of college, didn't know anything about anything, and what really struck me was there were really tenured, smart people who would kind of take me under their wing, and there was no, hierarchy. There was no pulling rank. It was if you were smart and you had a lot of hustle and you were a sponge and you wanted to learn, really experienced people would take you under their wing. One of my very first mentors is Brian Caffarelli. He's an absolute legend in kind of the sales go to market area. I was an RFP writer. I got the RFP writer job not knowing what the acronym RFP meant. I think I was the only one that applied because no one was that silly to sit in a room and write RFPs for 14 hours a day. So just by coincidence, I was next to Caffarelli, and he would kind of come in because we were always there working late. We were usually the last ones in the office, and we just struck up a friendship. And he was constantly kind of engaged in asking me questions about my work and offering up suggestions. And we built a friendship over time, and we're still dear friends today. I still call him for advice. We still usually talk every Monday after a Bears game. So that kind of collaborative kind of spirit is something that I see today. So we told you from day one, listen, if we're going to get you engaged with clients, we want you to hear what they're hearing. We want you to be a part of this team. We're not going to stick you in a corner and make you do, remedial kind of, whatever grunt work. I mean, you still have to do some of that. But you notice after we have a meeting, we'll do an immediate debrief. And that is a very honest, direct kind of representation of were we actually listening to what the client was asking for? How are we presenting our solutions? Were we making it about them first? And we give each other that feedback. And it really is a gift, right? And what always kind of makes me chuckle is we'll be in the middle of one of those debriefs and I'll be talking to one of the other partners, another 25, 30 year, experienced person, be like, now, guy, you see when Mike actually pointed out that I was rambling and he kind of redirected me and he cut me off in this but having that lack of kind of, you know, arrogance and being able to take that feedback and actually learn from it and proactively come up with it, that's something that is absolutely priceless, right? And it's in every manifestation. And I'll get off my soapbox in a second, I promise. But what's really interesting is I feel like the more tenured you get, the more experience you get, is you just kind of cut through that fluff, right? You're just much more direct. You're asking honest questions like, what's the problem? What are we trying to achieve here? How are we actually trying to demonstrate value of a solution, which is kind of at the core of our ethos? And you just cut through the fluff, the academic stuff. And so what I love about our team and you kind of coming up and with your education on this is you have experienced people that don't have time for the BS. They cut through it, they get to what the real issue is. And if there's a solution, great. And if there's not, that's fine too. How can we help even if we're not directly engaged? So that I think that cultural aspect of kind of collaboration, constant feedback and learning is something that's really important in any organization.
Yeah, I
Off
mean, I would.
soapbox now.
Yeah. I mean, I just think about, when I first started, I think you, Mike, and we were all sitting together in like a prospect meeting prep, and you were like, this is what I think we should do. And Mike very like calmly, lovingly was like, we need to not demo our solution in the first
That's
call.
a terrible idea. We should not do that.
But
But it was a great conversation. And I was like, yeah, you know what? You're absolutely right.
yeah,
And here's another thing too. And I've always, and I don't know if this is a personality thing or it's a part of my upbringing. I don't know. But I've always been incredibly comfortable with my own level of ignorance. If I don't understand what's happening, and in my corporate world, I was kind of known for this, right? There'd be 20 people in a room, executive level meeting, talking about something, and someone's up there pontificating about God knows what. And I would kind of raise my hand and ask a question like, wait, what is happening right now? Like, what are we actually doing? And like half the room would just kind of exhale and be like, oh, thank God that guy just asked that question. Now, there's a balance. You don't want to kind of, kind of constantly have no idea what you're doing. But when you're trying to get to the core of an issue, when you're trying to really understand what are actionable items that are going to come out of this, being comfortable enough and confident enough to ask those clarifying questions, 9 times out of 10 is the right answer, right? And I think everyone here is kind of, you know, as confident, and that comes with experience and expertise. But that's what you'll kind of build up over time is just get to the root of it, get to it, and then kind of get to work, right?
Right. 100%. And I mean, I just like, I think about, and it's so funny, the coincidence here. We were talking about Vince Beast the other day, or you sent out an email about Vince Beast, and he was like, what struck me was one sentence that says, like, clarity is power, right? It's like if you
Yeah,
can't explain your solution or what you're doing in one sentence, like the people you're talking to is not going to understand it, right?
yeah.
I think that's such a big part too of working with you guys is that you guys are very like it's cutting through the fluff is the clarity that you guys bring as well. And I does that come with time? Is that asking questions to make sure?
It it does. Yes, that comes with experience, right? So I had a 27-year career. Hewitt was acquired by Aon, spun off into Alight, right? These are all, very large, complex organizations. And at different stages of that, we would have consultants come in, which, being a consultancy, every one of those companies had consultant capabilities, but bringing in consultants around whatever. And where you got a whole lot of eye rolling and, I would say, a poor ROI was when it was a lot of academic rhetoric, right? And I feel like in the marketplace today, there is no shortage of data. There is an overwhelming amount of information and data available to us, right? And AI is only kind of accelerating this. The amount of that is just, so, frankly, it's overwhelming sometimes with how much information is out there. What is lacking, and this is where real operators come in. This is where people who have sat in that chair, and I don't care if it's, a chief commercial officer like me and Andy, I don't care if it's a CISO, IT leader like Sweeney, I don't care if it's a CFO like Heather. Doesn't matter what seat you're in. If you are an operator, you recognize that data is a powerful fuel. It's wonderful. It's wonderful. It's absolutely the lifeblood of any kind of proper decision making authority. But tell me what it means. What are the actual? What can I do with this data? What are the actionable insights here? Right. And so what we are constantly trying to crack the code on is make it real. Okay. You
Mm,
have solutions. There's a ton of different solutions out there. You have buyers, whether they're plan sponsors or consultancies, whatever. You have buyers, and they just want to understand, how do you connect the dots between what your solution is going to do and the impact on my business and my people? Okay. That's it. That's a very simple exercise. And then help me to demonstrate what the value of that is. And then I can make a decision about whether or not I can prioritize and say, yeah, this is something that my organization needs to do. But that gets through sorting through the academic. And, we'd have these project report outs that had 75 pages chock full of data, an overwhelming amount of academic information. And you have a partner up there who's pontificating about something. And then you have 15 junior partners who've been spending 16 hours a day putting together these reams of data. And then they'd walk out of the room incredibly proud of themselves and taking a whole bunch of money with them. And we'd sit around and go, okay, so what do we do now? That's the problem you're solving for,
right.
right?
Right.
Like, cut through, get that data. Tell me what the problem is that we're solving for. What is our opportunity to either improve that or accelerate something? And then show me the impact and the value to my organization. So if you talk about kind of what we're doing every day, it's connecting those dots between solution, impact, and then what the correlating value is, right?
Right. And it's so interesting because, you know, when I first started, I had ROI and VOI very closely intertwined. And now in my head, they're separate, I would say. Like ROI to me now is like, okay, this is the outcome, and VOI shows me like why I should do it now. Is that kind of the same deal in your mind, or
Yeah, I
what do
mean,
you how do you think about it?
there's absolutely a direct correlation, right? And so if we think about our clients, let's say it's a client who has a specific solution that is working with, sometimes if it's in the healthcare or digital health, the benefits ecosystem, something like that. A lot of us grew up there, so a lot of our current clients are in that space. What they're challenged with is, okay, I've got this solution that's solving a problem. But guess what? There's a lot of solutions that are in that space. Okay. And ROI is table stakes at this point. You have to have an ROI or you're just not going to go anywhere. Okay. Challenge number one is, how do we differentiate ourselves vis-a-vis the competition? Like what truly makes us unique and different? And in kind of this sea of solutions, it's easy to get lost in the noise. Everybody's kind of saying the same thing, right? Everybody shows up with a slick marketing and sales deck that looks amazing. They all point to, the features and functionalities of their solution, and then they say, "Hey, look at this amazing ROI." Well, the ROI is kind of generic, or it's based on a small data set, or and then they say, okay, and here's the ROI, and sign on the dotted line, and we'll get this baby going. There's no way to differentiate yourself in that case. And so, really getting to and testing on pressure testing, like what makes you unique and different, you have to start with that. The second challenge is going to be, and this gets back to that ROI VOI conversation, is how do you get to the front of the queue for budget? Every buyer, every decision maker is in a position where they have to make tough decisions. They may think your solution's awesome. They may see that it's going to have a big impact on your organization. They may even buy that there's going to be an ROI. But when they rank it against the other initiatives and the other dollars that every project is fighting for, it may not make the cut. So, how do you actually show that value? How do you actually show it from a strategic, from a financial, from a people, from a technology? How do you actually personalize it, make it very specific to their organization, and connect those dots from between the solution and the opportunity and the impact it's going to have, right? And that's where we use technology, Value Engine, to kind of close that gap. Okay. But then the third challenge, and I'm going to raise my hand, I've been in this situation more times than I care to admit, is how do you actually get through that last mile? How do you actually clearly articulate to someone who isn't familiar with these solutions, right? These are executives, they're smart people, but they don't have an intimate knowledge of the problem that you're solving or the solution that you're bringing to the table. How do you, in a very simple, concise way, communicate complex solutions and the problems they're challenged for, and convey that value to that executive or oversight committee that they're actually going to approve it, right? And I've fallen into this trap many times in my career. I've been at that finish line. My champion has said, "Don't worry, this is a rubber stamp. We got everything tightened up and everything's great." Awesome. You've got the champagne bottle ready to pop. You're ready to go. You've been working on this deal for a year and a half. It's ready to go. You're already thinking about how you're going to spend that commission check, right? And then they come back and they said, the CFO killed it at the last second because it's not one of the highest strategic priorities. They are watching as your soul is leaving your body. That's how soul crushing this is, right? And so being able to clearly and concisely help draw that correlation between how this is unique and different, how it is a high priority that needs to be solved now, and here's the value associated with it, and here's why, for that executive, for that committee, this is the most important priority and it's worthy of hard fought budget dollars. So that's kind of how that, ROI just isn't good enough yet, right? Anybody can slap together an ROI. It's demonstrating that value and making it as precise and personalized using their own data input and insights to make that case. And you have to co-create that with the client. You can't just force it on them. Otherwise, it's just not going to be compelling.
Hmm. And and I've heard you say this a couple different times. When you talk about one, was ROI, was that ever sufficient to close a deal like very early on?
Sure.
Right. Okay.
And,
And
and,
so,
and you know what?
right.
Sometimes it is today. Like, I don't want to, this there's no one size fits all to anything, right? And I think that in this age of AI, that's one of the potential pitfalls that we can fall into, right? Anybody can throw something into a calculator and say, hey, here's an ROI based on different elements, right? But being able to actually understand and again, assess the impact of that solution, co-create it with them, and ultimately give that client the power to say, yes, this is valid for our organization, or no, change it or take it out, right? You want the experts to be able to really put their fingerprints on the co-creation of that business case that demonstrates that value. And this is a fundamental shift, right?
Mm,
Throughout my career, I've and a lot of my time was spent in kind of the technology and specifically benefits HCM BPO space, right? And these are multi-million dollar decisions with large organizations, so this takes a lot. We spent countless hours talking about how do we mitigate, the risk of a CIO killing this deal because they don't like that it's adding a new technology into their stack, or it might be impacting their sandbox, and whatever the case may be. How do we actually mitigate the risk of a CFO punching holes in our ROI? And sometimes that's blocking or going around whatever else, right? Now that dynamic is shifted. And so what we're empowering our clients to do is say, no, no, no. We want that skepticism. We want every part of the organization that's going to be impacted by this solution coming in to have a seat at that table to help with that co-creation of the business case. And at the end of that, we want it to be as simple as hitting a button and being able to have an executive summary that captures those insights, that captions those decision points, captures their company specific data so that that end customer is going to have that clear, concise explanation. So when they get that question from their CEO that says, "What is this? Tell me what's going on," it's a 1 or 2 page executive summary. They can clearly see this is the solution, this is the problem it's solving, this is the value it's generating, and then they can look up and they said, "Did this person, this person, this person, my lieutenants validate all of this?" Yes, they did. Great. There we go. Right?
mm,
That's ultimately the dynamic that we're trying to create. It's going from kind of we're sitting on different sides of the table to we're on the same side of the table collaborating, co-creating so that we can demonstrate the value here. Because everybody ultimately wins, right? When you go
right.
through that diligence, it's something that is going to help the organization. Okay? If it doesn't work, it's gonna be vetted, right? You're going to be exposed if it isn't the highest priority, if it isn't going to work, if it doesn't demonstrate value that's going to get the job done. It shouldn't be put in, right? But if it is, now you're getting on that path where you can actually get to a deal.
Right. And in your thought process of creating the value engine and like working with Kapo Mavani, the brains behind the value engine,
Oh, he's the
was that
best.
ever a result of like, all these buyers getting burned from HR point solutions
Yeah,
where they had just adopted and they were like, this is going to be great, but then engagements, less than 6% and just sitting on a shelf somewhere.
yeah, I think you hit it on the head, and you've heard this from a ton of clients, right? And this is where we see a ton of market feedback happening as well, which is just make it real for me, right? Your job doesn't end when the deal is sold. Like it's just beginning, right?
Mm,
And so once a solution is in place, and we saw a lot of this in COVID, right? COVID was such a massive global cultural shift, right? You had plan sponsors, and this is especially in kind of the healthcare, the financial well-being space, especially behavioral health, mental health, things like that. There was a genuine, rush to get people those solutions that they really needed, right? And so the byproduct of that, and we've actually seen this playing out, a few years later, is you have a plan sponsor with this ecosystem of solutions that in many cases, you said it perfectly, they may be amazing programs, but they're not being utilized. Or they have a lack of visibility into how effective they are. And so, in the absence of all of this data, again, an overwhelming amount of data, reams and reams of reports and numbers and everything else, well, what does this mean? Is it actually working? How am I actually prioritizing these different solutions? And how is it actually working out? That's where they're really looking to us in collaboration with our partners to say, what is the engagement? Once somebody is actually in this program, is it effective? And then what's the correlations to their physical health, their mental health, their financial health, whatever the case may be, right? And so that gives an effective picture of we are actually getting some value out of this program. And then here's how it's impacting it. And that gets back towards the prioritization. So what we hear from a ton of plan sponsors and consultants and brokers play a critical role in this, which is assessing the efficacy and the value that's being driven by the different programs in place today to make some hard decisions around budget, around strategic direction, and more importantly, where are they actually trying to drive engagement for the most effective kind of programs, right? And so being able to kind of use our platform to accurately communicate that post-implementation is something we call value realization, where we're spending a lot of time and focus and have multiple clients in pilot right now to figure out the technology part of that and getting the data, aggregating it, synthesizing it, and then providing real kind of actionable insights.
And that brings the next question to my mind is like that it becomes so imperative to understand your client's holistic view of their business. And for someone like myself, like where I'm trying, just to even learn what a plan sponsor is, it's like I've never
Sure.
heard of that before. How do you go from, or what does that process look like of, hey, I'm an infant in this space and I want to make sure I'm asking the right questions to understand and to continue to learn down the road. What does that look like in your mind?
I mean, so you have a group of trusted mentors right now. That is an absolutely incredible asset, right? When we're in some meetings, there'll be a lot of acronyms being flown around, and I'll be kind of sending you, an instance that says this is what ICRA means, or this is what this is what a specific program is. Take notes, and this is easier than ever with kind of note takers, right? When you take notes and you have recordings and things like that, use AI tools at your disposal. That is a wonderful way to kind of say, hey, what are these terms that this subject matter expert is throwing out? What does it actually mean? I use that all the time, right? I'm on the phone with really, really smart people. The last 2 weeks, I've been on the phone with, I think, five different chief medical officers or chief clinical officers. There is a decent amount of time that I have no idea what they're talking about. Okay. And because they're getting into the nuts and bolts of their solutions that's making real progress around, treating cancer, treating, metabolic health, treating, these very high impact kind of medical conditions. That's okay that I don't understand some of these different acronyms being thrown out. I can look that up. Now, that homework you can do on your own, and it's going to be really effective, right? But then once you come out and you say, okay, how does it fit into the bigger picture? Or I'm not quite understanding how these things work out. That's when you rely on one of us and you ask the question. So what I really am excited about with Guy Talk is A, it's super fun, but B, like getting some of those subject matter experts out there and explaining it in lay people's terms, right? You're new to some of these things, but I've been around for a long time. I still don't know the answer to these things. And so I think a fun thing about this podcast is just ask those questions and have really smart people who know their subject matter incredibly deeply and well, articulated in a way that somebody who's been in the workforce for, whatever it is, 6 months now, can understand it. I think that is incredibly valuable to kind of anyone that would potentially listen to this.
And I 100% agree. Like I definitely that's something I can work on, myself is asking those questions. I think you do have a great quality of being able to ask like what are we talking about? And then everyone else in the room can be like, okay, somebody said it. So, I think that's really powerful for sure.
And one like and so part of that is, once you've established that baseline, but you'll hear this in a lot of the meetings that we're in. It's not just me, it's kind of everyone, right? But
Mm,
asking those questions to kind of understand, like, how do, how is this actually going to impact the end user of this solution, right? And I always take myself or my family or friends as kind of the proxies for this. If can I understand how this is actually going to work? Is it easy for me? Am I actually going to engage in this program? And so taking that perspective around the end customer or the end consumer of services, technology, solutions, whatever you're kind of talking through, taking it from that perspective is always going to be really effective. Because sometimes we're all guilty of this. We get too spun up in the minutia here when you want to keep it as simple as possible. Are people going to use this? Is it going to help them? And then what's the impact and value going to be? That's really it, right? And so when you're asking those questions, that's just being a good advisor. It's helping to position it. How is it going to be used? How is it going to be used? Can people understand it? Because there's a lot of solutions that fail that were absolutely dynamite. They had great capabilities. They just couldn't articulate how it works and what the impact is going to be. And
mm,
there's, for every one successful, thriving, growing business, there's a bunch that failed because they couldn't crack the code on that. They couldn't demonstrate the value of their solution in a simple, easy to understand way. And that's kind of why we're we're here, basically.
right. And kind of, I mean, rattling off kind of, you know, I take those as the three principles that I hear you bring up to a lot of our clients. Would you say that feeds into your superpower is, being able to take a complex problem and simplify it and make it clear? Um, what's your opinion on that?
Right? I mean, yeah. When I think about, was that your $1 million question right there? Did you just give
Kind
me
of
the
snuck
answer
it
to the
in
test a little bit?
a little bit, but
Okay,
what's your
it's fine.
opinion on your superpower
So
superpower as
like
well?
I genuinely think that like I have a very curious mind. Like I want to see how things work. And so I tend to dive into complex problems and come up with those simple solutions and help to be able to kind of translate that with the help of really smart people. So
Mm,
when I was running teams and we are going through these long multi-year cycles sometimes that were incredibly complex, I would say if I'm the smartest person in the room, we've got a big problem on our hands. And I was blessed throughout my career to be surrounded by incredible subject matter expertise, right? I grew up in an actuarial firm. I grew up with some of the best consultants in the world. I grew up with some of the best technologists in the world, right? When you're surrounded by them, but you can actually take these complex current situations and be able to really make be able to communicate that in a simple, easy to understand way, that's where my superpower is, right? Curious mind, make the complex more simple for people to understand the impact and the value that's going to be demonstrated. That's where I've really spent my entire career, and frankly it's what I love doing, right? I've told you this a number of times, like when there's chaos, like run towards it because that's where you can make the biggest impact. If things are shiny and great and sunshine and rainbows and ponies, like, okay, that's great. If there's fires and it's chaos and screams of anguish, like that's where you need to run to because that's where you can make the biggest impact, right? It's a
Right.
little dramatic, but you know what I'm saying.
I do. And I think that plays perfectly into kind of this the situation we are in now where you see like all these corporate companies that are doing mass layoffs, and we have talks of recession all the time. That's scary for a lot of us, and I think to take it into a perspective of that's opportunity as well. I mean, what do you look for? What are you looking for as, hey, this is my time to shine, or I can really make a difference here and help people make make an impact?
So let's use a real life example, okay? So, and you are directly involved in it. It's early November 2025. Last Friday afternoon, it's Tuesday now, we were having a conversation as a team about how people are freaking out. Plan sponsors have gotten rates back from carriers that are just astronomical. They're being passed on in the form of premiums to their members and their families that people just can't afford, right? We've got macroeconomic trends happening. We've got the government shutdown. We've got, ACA. We've got all of these different factors. And so that's my definition of kind of chaos happening right now. And then everyone, whether it's a broker, consultant, are now beating up the carriers, and the carriers are throwing their hands up like, what do we, what do we do? Everyone is intrinsically connected here, and it's a big problem that ends up in kind of my premiums are going up, your premiums go, everybody's premiums are going up. It's unsustainable. So we as a group got our heads together and we said, okay, job one, cost containment. How do we actually identify solutions, whether it's technology, services, whatever, in our partnerships and our ecosystem? Some of these are formalized, some of them aren't. And what did we do all weekend? We were doing research into what are the most effective solutions. We were outreaching to some of those partners and saying, hey, we want to put together a cost containment package that we can bring to consultants and brokers they can bring to their customers, their clients, and say, hey, here are some ideas around how we can actually impact that. We built out a modeler over the weekend. We're going to put it into the Value Engine tool so that very quickly you can have anywhere from 3 to 5 solutions, minimal impact to existing budget. They can be implemented off cycle. Speed is critical here so that you can actually start reversing that. And if we start off with a baseline trend increase of 10%, which is probably conservative in many cases, and we can put these solutions in the hands of someone, very quickly implement them. If we can mitigate that 10% or even go above that, that's a massive win, right? And it
Right.
all started because we're having a conversation about the chaos we're hearing in the market from our clients, from the broker consultant partners, from the end, the plan sponsors. Everyone is trying to tackle this. So we get our heads together and we say, let's get creative here. How do we package this up? And how do we clearly articulate it? How do we solve those 3 problems there? And then how can we quickly go to market? And that's all been happening in the past, 4 or
4
5
days.
days, and we're
Yep.
working on it every day.
Right.
That's a perfect example of what I'm talking about.
Hmm.
You know what the problem is, come up with the different solutions, you make it as easy as possible, and you clearly articulate the value of what they can achieve by that. You're faced with 10% increases plus, that's not going to change for the next 2 years. Here's a solution that you can implement that's relatively cost neutral from a budget standpoint with some tremendous upside. Yeah, let's have an interesting conversation about that. Make it easy and move fast. Real
And
life example, and you're
yeah,
working on it right now with us.
yeah, yeah. And explain to me how important. I mean, you have the inside lane into what brokers and consultants are thinking now. Um, what's going on in their minds?
Well, I mean, so I worked at Aon for many years. Amazing experience. So I've been on that side as well, right? I've had healthcare consultants. They have the thing that the healthcare consultants and brokers care about most is actually delivering something of value to their clients. They want long-term relationships, they want trusted relationships. They want to be seen as those trusted advisors that are going to come with very targeted specific solutions for all of these the problems that we're talking about, typically around cost and keeping their people healthy and everything else. Part of what I was doing was kind of protecting them from the hordes of, solutions that are out there that want to kind of take up a bunch of mind space and everything else. So if you ask me, what can we do that's most helpful to a broker or consultant is understand their client base, make it as personalized as possible, and give them access to a tool that they can do different modeling, they can understand the impact, and they are the subject matter experts. They certainly know more about the client than we do, and in many cases they know more about the client than the client does. That's how deep and smart these folks are in serving their clients. If we can empower them with a tool that they can actually do that analysis, they can actually input client specific data and make it easy for them. That's a great collaboration right there, and everybody wins. It doesn't waste their time. They don't have to sit through 2 hours of lunch and learns every week about something that isn't relevant to their client. We're precise, we're targeted, we facilitate these conversations, right? We give them those tools and we connect them with solutions that are actually going to move the needle around what their objectives are. So that collaborative relationship between provider, broker, consultant, and client is something that we're always trying to facilitate and make easier for every party involved. And technology, we spent a year developing Value Engine. That's the key to it, right? Make it easy. Be able to share information, be able to, effectively show that analysis in an easy to understand way. That's super important for that dynamic.
Right. And for Value Engine, I mean, I was thinking about this the other day. Was there ever a moment where you were having a conversation with maybe a broker, a consultant, or a client, and you're like, man, I wish I could show you this. Like, I wish I had a tool that was, I could just like lay it all out in front of you. Or was it just
I
like
mean,
iterative?
yeah, I mean that's exactly why we built it. Spreadsheets are great. They're clunky. They're tough to use. You have to be like, I am not an Excel wizard by any stretch of the imagination, but I appreciate kind of if you can get into that depth of detail. But what we're constantly struggling with is nobody's going to get on the phone with you for, 45 minutes and go line by line through, look at cell G14, and tell us what data points are there. Like, you have to have a user interface. You have to have UI, UX that you can actually enable as a tool. And so when we're working with clients and understanding, okay, how do we, again, demonstrate the value for our clients, Koppel and I were doing a lot of that. We were building it in Excel. We were muscling it into PowerPoint. And one day, we just kind of looked at each other and we're like, why don't we build this? And there's some tools out there that do that. And trust me, we did a ton of diligence on what are those different kinds of capabilities. We built this from the ground up. So you know, from a technology standpoint, from a foundational technology standpoint, using the latest and greatest and building something from scratch gave us an incredible advantage. And so now, with our clients that we have on platform today, they're hearing things as they're going through this with brokers and consultants. They're hearing things what they're going through with their customers, and we have that constant feedback loop so that we're updating it, and and I mean, we can do it in minutes and hours, not wait for coding changes for a month or 6 weeks and kind of move it. It is dynamically updated in real time so that once we make that update, the next analysis we're doing, it's ready to go. That speed is critical as you're constantly getting feedback and evolving the tool, whether it's broker and consultants or clients.
And you know, how does using a tool like the Value Engine, or even just how does your sales methodology change when you tend to sell into like a recession versus an economic boom?
Yeah, I mean, and that's going to come down to, what are the organization's goals, right? What ultimately is the client trying to achieve? And there's obvious elements, right? Every organization wants to help their people. They want to lower costs. And people get that healthy equates to lower costs in the long run. But there's a delicate balance between near-term expense and investment and long-term kind of ROI and impact of different kinds of programs. That's pretty specific to kind of the healthcare and benefits ecosystem in that space. But a lot of our technology clients are in the exact same situation. It's a bit more black and white. If they implement a technology, they're going to gain processing efficiencies. They're going to get automation efficiencies. They're going to have lower utilization for cloud computing costs, right? And so being able to get very precise and go through an analysis in 10, 15, 20 minutes, depending on the complexity of the solution, versus going through and for hours and hours and trading emails with spreadsheets on SharePoint and you get access issues. Like being able to have a tool that you can quickly and efficiently share information, collaborate on what the different assumptions are and what value drivers are actually in place, that's a game changer. And so all of the feedback we get is it makes it simple, intuitive, and easy, and the output is going to be personalized and precise versus generic ROI claims and, whatever the case may be, right? I can
Right.
point to case studies or white papers or whatever else, and you're going to be like, okay, welcome to the club. Everybody's in it. If I come to you with something that's very specific that we worked on together, it's right. You know it's right. And so that's a really important distinction. And really that was the origin story for Value Engine is we just needed that kind of collaborative tool that could connect those dots between solution, impact, and value.
When you're working with someone that's solution tends to be more on the soft savings side than like hard savings, how do you make sure you're bringing those soft savings like into fruition? Um,
Yeah, it's a really good question. And so having grown up in the HR technology space, there's a lot of elements to business cases that are a bit soft. They're a bit fluffy, right? And there's
mm,
a perception many times that different initiatives can be nice to haves. Like, it'll make people happy, and that's good. But when you get down to the cold, hard realities of life, whether it's financials or technology, and CFOs and procurement and IT tend to be the ones that get beat up a lot as kind of the cold-hearted, it has to be hard dollar and everything else.
mm,
And I think there's a misconception there because my experience has been that's largely due to ineffective an ineffective approach to kind of articulating that value and really quantifying it in a real and defensible way. An example. Behavioral health. It's really hard traditionally for a behavioral health, let's say it's a point solution, to say if someone is actually getting the support they need mentally, and this can be financial, it could be financially, financial well-being. It could be stress. It could be sleep. There's a myriad of things that we as human beings can do to improve our health that cover in a lot of different categories. Traditionally, that's really hard to quantify. And so when you have a more analytical kind of, reviewer of this, that's the finance, the IT, the procurements of it, it's tough to kind of draw that correlation. When we get into the data behind it, and again, this starts off with, a, a bottoms up analysis of what this solution is actually doing. It's identifying those value drivers and what's going to kind of go in place on that. And then it's actually understanding what the secondary impacts are going to be around different kinds of programs. If you have people that are healthier for all those different kind of components, where are those direct correlations so that the analytical reviewers can actually understand the impact? I'll give you some examples. Productivity, right? Absenteeism, presenteeism. If there's an engagement tool that's actually getting more diabetics into type 2 diabetics into a treatment program, and that impact and that participation rate goes from 3% to 6%. What's the causality there? Like, what's the impact of that happening, right? If there are people that are managing their stress in a different way, how does that translate into, productivity, people showing up for work, being more effective in their jobs? That's hard to quantify sometimes, but there's definitely a path. And ultimately, if you identify those different value drivers and you leave it to that client to actually say, yeah, that is something that impacts my organization, or no, that isn't relevant, great. If it's no, let's take it out. That gets to that kind of precision around make it real for them and help understand the impact. And then once we're actually saying, okay, we've got alignment on the impact and the value of this solution, now we're going to implement it. What are we going to track? How do we make sure that we have established a baseline around what the projected impact is going to be? But then as a part of ongoing governance, how are we measuring that in an effective way and then reporting back on kind of our progress and how we've done? That's the formula that we're looking for, because everybody can sign up for that. I don't care if you're finance, procurement, HR, benefits, technology, whomever. Everybody gets an alignment on here's what the goals are for impact, here's how we're going to measure against it, and here's how we're going to then kind of report out on how we're going to kind of make it the most successful program that you can.
Have you ever ran into like a situation where, implementing a certain solution makes perfect sense? The cost savings are there, but you just can't get everyone on board. Like, there's pushback, whether it's for whatever reason. How do you navigate that as a salesperson?
So there's two. So to answer your question directly, yeah, all the time. I can't tell you how many times I've been involved in a sales pursuit where I was like, how did they not buy that? Like, and it's for all the reasons we talked about, right? Any one of those factors can kill a deal. You have somebody that can't, I'm not kidding you. I've had opportunities where I'm like, this is a perfect solution for this client. It is going to solve all kinds. And I thought everything was wrapped up. Everything was tightened up. The business case was tight. That everything was, nailed down. Every T was crossed and I was dotted. And then it got killed because they said there's another strategic priority. We need to actually build a manufacturing plant, and everything else kind of goes by the wayside. That happens sometimes, right? There were other cases where I got some very direct feedback from another friend and mentor, former boss of mine, Craig Maloney. We were debriefing a deal that I thought was there. I thought it was done. And I put everything into this deal. I mean, my son was born, and I was on a plane 3 days later to go to a finalist meeting for this deal. Mrs. Black not happy about that. But that's how much effort I put into this deal, and we lost. And we're going through the debrief about how we lost this deal. And he turns to me and he said, do you think you got outsold in this deal? And that crushed me. Like, I was floored. I said, how could you say such a thing? I just told you all of this effort and time and sacrifice I put into this deal. But what I realized later, that's not what he was asking. He was asking not from my perspective about my efforts and how well I did this, but from the buyer's perspective. And there was a misalignment between what I was communicating and positioning for this and what the buyer's objectives and priorities were. And so I learned a really hard, cold lesson there. And I realized that was coming from a place of love, not cruelty, because I've used that on myself ever since. Did I get outsold? And sometimes I have to look in the mirror and say, yeah. And all you can do is learn from that, right? So never losing sight of that. Your perspective is secondary relative to what that buyer's perspective is critically important. If you're not laser focused on what the client's needs are, you're not doing it right. You're not coming from that right perspective. Okay, so that's the question you asked. Can I answer a question you didn't ask?
Yes.
There are some situations where the solution is not a good fit.
Hmm.
And at that point, there's a really important inflection point about, do I try and sell this solution that actually isn't going to be as effective or work the way people think? Earlier in my career, I was selling a solution that wasn't very flexible. You kind of had to fit in a box or it didn't work very well and it would break. And I learned very quickly, talking to clients, and every deal was precious, right? At that time, if you sold 4 or 5 deals in a year, you were doing really well. Every deal was precious. And I learned you just have to be honest with it, with yourselves and with your clients, and say, this isn't a good fit. Like when you get into that diligence and it's not going to provide the value or it's a bad solution fit or whatever, like, don't sell them something that isn't going to meet their expectations or doesn't work. Like, your own personal brand is too important in the marketplace. And there were salespeople who did. They wanted that commission. They would sell it. They'd throw it over the fence to the implementation team. They'd cash their commission check and they'd run away. And those people would walk around our operations centers and, you know, they didn't have rotten vegetables being thrown at them, but there were plenty of dirty looks walking around. Okay?
Hmm.
So doing what's ultimately the right thing for the client is critically important. What I love about, and I don't want this to be too commercially, but what I love about the value engine from a process standpoint is you take that away. Like, you know that the value is in the eyes of the client. So that it's an inherent kind of qualification process that you know that there's a good fit here. And then you can kind of move forward from there, right?
Right.
So that's really important to say, all right, is this the right thing? Is it solving those challenges? Is this unique and different, better than what they have today or what they're looking for? Is it a high priority? Because sometimes when you get down to it, they're going to say, no, this isn't. It actually isn't going to have the biggest impact. And then you have to respect that opinion. And there's plenty of fish in the sea, you kind of move on, but not selling something to them that isn't going to drive the value that they're expecting, like, it's just bad business. Just don't do it, right?
Right.
I've had some of those where I said no, walk away, and killed some of those different deals that many years later came back and said, hey, Ryan, I've got this other set of problems. Can you help me out with them? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Let's have a whirl. Because I had that credibility. They knew they could trust me not to sell them a bunch of garbage that wasn't going to work.
And I mean, it's interesting because you hear about, top down pressure where it's like, hey, we want you to push this certain solution. How do you navigate that? Like,
I mean, that's always going to be there. Like any organization that you're in, you're going to have a quota. It's going to be a stretch quota. It's, the January 1st dread of, I just reset to zero, right? 1201, I've got his big zero on the board. How am I going to hit that number? Like, that pressure never goes away. But if you can effectively kind of look at your pipeline and say, here are the early stage opportunities that I'm cultivating. Here are some great partners and channels I know I'm going to get certain opportunities from. I need to cherish and maintain those relationships. Absolutely. And then I know that there's certain that I have kind of in process right now and manage those effectively. If you start segmenting what you're doing every day, it becomes less terrifying. And a lot of that is, I know there's a certain amount of opportunity that I can see today. I know there's a certain opportunity that's going to come based on the behaviors and the actions I'm doing with partners and distribution channels and things like that. And I know that when I have a good alignment between what I'm actually going to actually sell my clients, and I can actually demonstrate the value of that, I can make some assumptions around what percentage of those we're actually going to get to that are going to kind of come to fruition. It takes the terror of it out a little bit. And so that's effective planning. And it's going to vary by everyone. Some people have territories. Some people have kind of, different channels that they're looking at. So being able to keep it simple, look at the numbers, compartmentalize some of those different elements, it makes it more real and achievable. So if you can kind of bite it off into, consumable chunks, then it tends to help things out a ton.
Right. And from a sales leader standpoint, I mean, everyone's going to have a quota, and that makes complete sense. I mean, people need goals to shoot for, um, but how do you make sure your team is motivated through, not terror of missing their quota, but I want, is it motivational? Is it, you know, we're going to do really well? Like, how do you make sure
No,
your team's performing?
make no doubt about it. The terror of quotas is motivating. That is,
Yeah,
I
for
mean,
sure.
and
Yeah,
that's self-imposed, right? If
I
you're a salesperson and you don't hit your quota, you're going to have a problem on your hands, right? And there's
right.
various degrees of patience, I'll call it,
Mm,
depending on the company, the solution, everything else. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Like that quota is there for a reason. The company has to hit that quota. And trust me, I've built enough of these quotas to know, like, that's not just a, hey, it'd be great if we can hit this. That is in order for our organization to survive, grow, and thrive, these are the numbers that need to be hit. And
mm,
so that's a real thing, and it creates inherent motivation no matter what, right? On the other side of that, from a management standpoint, everybody has different kinds of, and I've worked for different sales managers. I've led teams, in a variety of different capacities. Everyone has their own style. So I'm not gonna I'm not gonna, claim that I understand what the right style is. But what I would say is to be the most effective um, salespeople and accounts people that are managing existing relationships and obviously want to grow into existing accounts, they have a simple, repeatable process that they're going to follow. Okay. It's not the Wild West. They understand here's how I'm going to connect with my clients. Here's how I'm going to demonstrate value to them. Here's how I'm going to actually build and cultivate and grow this relationship over time. Okay. A repeatable, simple process is going to be a foundational aspect of that. The second part of it is, and again, varying degrees based on how big or little of an organization is, but do they actually have a support network? Can they actually ask questions or ask for help or counsel or guidance or something like that? Because what I see is many sales leaders, they have so many direct reports, they don't have the bandwidth to be able to spend one-on-one time with each one of them. And so, I mean, if you have 12 direct reports, you've got direct client relationships, you're out on the road all the time, you're managing this, like, am I going to be able to spend 3 or 4 an hour a week with each one of my reps? No. You know, there's only 12 hours in a workday for for some of those people. So how do you actually create that support network? And sometimes that's with more seasoned reps or helping out the less tenured reps. Sometimes that's when bringing in some outside resources to help with coaching in some capacity. You know, figure out where those channels are, because the last thing that you want is a consortium of individual mercenaries within a sales team who aren't talking to each other, who aren't collaborating, who aren't sharing what's working, what's not working, what's going on in the market. Then you're just going to get people that get frustrated. They don't see a path towards hitting their quota, and they're going to leave the organization. Then you got to start all over again, right? And you see this. You see a lot of reps that'll be, a year or 2 years, 3 years, and they just jump to everyone. And I don't think that's always because they're not good at their jobs. I think many organizations don't provide that support network so that they
mm.
can actually grow and thrive and make mistakes and continually evolve. Because we all know the most effective people in sales and accounts are the ones that have been around for a while because they have that process. They understand that support network. They can actually provide value to their clients. That's how you actually grow sustainably.
Yeah, as my first job out of college, I will be interested to see what the people around me as I go back and talk and they say, hey, this is what we're
Yeah.
doing in our job, and be able to contrast it versus what we're doing here and say, this is what makes us different. And it'll be an interesting learning opportunity to say, hey, th- these are things that have come from, your guys' beginnings at Hewitt. Like you talked about the Hewitt huddle already. I don't hear the friends that I have and other sales organizations saying, yeah, I get to talk and debrief with my manager very often. Well, this has been a great first episode. I don't think this could have went any better. You've shared so much wisdom.
You're the boss, my man. Thank you for having me. This was so much fun. I'm really excited to see what Guy Talk has in store and can't wait to hear some more guests on here.
Yeah. Until next time, thanks again.